We are doing Augochloropsis today. We have Zack Portman here. I'll let him do his own introduction. And Mike Arduser will be joining us again shortly. So we have a nice cameo of experts here. And I think last time I said that we were going to take a break that final week of the month, but we have decided to take the last 2 weeks off. So we'll come back in January. I think we're going to start with Halictus. Still soliciting people to present any guides that they've made on their own, whether those are cheat sheets or something published, it doesn't matter. And organizing a Bombus setup. That's what we have on docket right now. So continue sending in requests. We'll get those on the list in ways that make sense. And I think that's all I have to introduce. So Zack can speak for himself, and then we'll get started with the bees.
Great.
All right. So yeah, I'm Zack Portman. I am a bee taxonomist currently at the University of Minnesota in the Caribou Native Bee Lab. I got my start, got my PhD at Utah State University under Terry Griswold, where I did some work on the taxonomy of Perdita. And in the recent past, I've kind of just been a general taxonomist doing a lot of ID and general taxonomy work and, partnering with a bunch of people, especially the Minnesota DNR and FWS and NPS and some others.
Thanks, Zack. And Mike will join us. And so what we want to tackle today is Augochloropsis, and Zack and Mike, and maybe a couple others, have been working on the problem of multiple species being present in Augochloropsis and trying to straighten some of that out. So I think maybe, Zack, if you could just kind of give us an outline of what's called currently on the books, what are the species at hand, which would, I think, just be that we'll deal with in terms of that might be new that we'll talk about, which would be the sumptuosa stuff and the metallica stuff. And then the things we were talking about beforehand, we'll just let that slide for the moment.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a little complicated, but yeah, the current situation before we go ahead and make all the changes that will happen hopefully within like the next 6 months. There's really like 3 species in the US. So the primary ones are sumptuosa, which is kind of the rare sand obligate species. And then there's metallica, which is currently divided into 2 subspecies, metallica metallica and metallica fulgida. And then in Florida and maybe neighboring states, there's Augochloropsis anonyma. And yeah, so the project that we're working on, we were, initially just trying to formally split the subspecies of metallica into full species. And it's ballooned out from that as we've continued to find kind of some undescribed species.
Yeah, so here's what I'm thinking, and Mike has joined us now too, is that what we can do is start with the metallica group, and I've got specimens of both fulgida and metallica, and talk through. I think what we have is Mike's current key. Discover Life has largely reflects Mike's current key right now, but rather than look at a bunch of words, I think it's better to look at specimens and talk through how to tell and what the features are and how to tell these this group apart. So if it makes sense to you guys, I'll put up a metallica, or basically metallica right now, specimen, and you can speak about however you want, and I will show the characteristics. So I'm going to grab my screen. Again, if you have pictures of any of this that you want to throw up, I think you're both presenters, so we can shift to your screen too. But right now I'm going to go to the share my screen, and we'll be able to see a map, but we'll actually want to go to the camera. Let me get rid of a couple panels here. And I'm going to put a metallica on there. So if you guys want to start talking, if that makes sense, very loose here, about metallica versus fulgida, that would be good. And then when we get to anonyma and sumptuosa, I think it'll be clear what the differences between those less common things are from the metallica group. But this is metallica, and fulgida are the things that most people run into, let's say, right now. So if you want to talk and ask, I can start showing people what some of those features might be rather than take up any more bandwidth.
Yes,
So
I can do that. Although before we dive into that, it might be useful to go over the tegula shape, which is kind of the defining feature of Augochloropsis, the genus.
yeah, so we have gone, this is a
Uh,
good redux. We've talked about that in past, we've gone through all the genera of the Eastern United States. So we've talked about this in general, but I think it's good to point out again.
Yes. But yeah, out of all the shiny green, halictids, this kind of unique tegula shape where it's kind of got this kind of hook on it, that's what's going to differentiate it super easily from anything else that you're going to see.
And when you're doing an awful lot of green bee identifications, which often is the case in a large survey program, particularly using bowl traps, Augochloropsis is going to be one of your lesser members. And what happens is that people speed through and they don't notice the tegula shape, even though it's pretty obvious. So you want to, when you're doing this, and the wing characters can fall, I forget which, into Pura or Algochlorella lines. But what you want to look for is a tegula shape, and also look at this area that will often be the case, but not always. You'll see this band here in the back of, it's Fimbria would be the technical name, but this very tight band, very parallel hairs, and that is different from the other groups in terms of separating or catching, really, because this is the least, is much less common than in most places than Pura or the Algochlorella group.
Yes.
And I'm sure you guys will talk about this too.
Yeah, so that character, there's a lot of different names for it. Some people call it Fimbria. I just call it like the T2 comb, and it's essentially just, hairs on the second tergite that form what I think of as a comb shape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can kind of see them now, and the hairs there are, noticeably thickened and look like a comb. Whereas, so this is metallica. And so metallica fulgida has kind of a similar comb, but the hairs are not thickened, so it can actually be pretty hard to see and notice. But that's kind of the main splitting character. Fulgida is also a lot shinier than metallica, although they're both fairly shiny bees.
We'll show pictures of that too, of fulgida too.
And you also need to be careful because those hairs can be worn off fairly easily as well.
And I've noticed in fulgida, there's more variation in that the characteristics of that band. Like some can be relatively dense and others almost absent. Then metallic.
Yes, and I would say the variation in fulgida is because it's likely a species complex.
Yeah.
So in most areas, when you see, like I think in Texas, you're going to get weird stuff where the T2 combs do not fit the metallica fulgida kind of dichotomy. And if you're in Texas, I would recommend against trying to get these to species.
Yeah. Yeah, I've gotten to that area in specimens and started pulling my hair out. I'll note, but you guys could let me know how this works in the Midwest. In the East, metallica at a much higher probability. In fact, maybe if you have an Augochloropsis that's in that group and it's got a heavy duty blue sheen to it versus bright green, it's almost always a metallica, not a metallica fulgida group member. But does that work in the Midwest too, or is that not the case sometimes?
It's hard to tell. There is definitely a lot of variation in the color. Yeah, I would say metallica fulgida definitely tends to be more of a shiny green. But randomly you will get like purplish ones. It also, I think, depends on the processing. Like I think some of them, if they're like stored in alcohol, it can do some weird things to the color and bring out shades of color that you wouldn't see in real life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say, yeah, typically the metallica are not as brassy green in some times, but they definitely overlap in coloration a lot. So
Mhm.
yeah, coloration with these is not something I typically pay attention to just because it is really variable.
So do you guys want to talk about surface sculpturing here now that I've got T1 in place? Mike, I know
Yes.
one of your
Can you hear me? I'm getting tremendous echo, so it's hard.
I'm not hearing echo at this end, but you are, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do you have maybe two screens open? Sometimes what happens if you have a competing session on another machine, or accidentally you've opened one twice.
I don't know.
Okay.
We're reporting the chat says no echo, but so maybe if you want to log in and log back out, I'll just make you a presenter again when you come back.
Well, I can deal with it.
Okay.
All right.
Mike, did you want to talk about T1 characters in fulgida and metallica?
Yeah, let me back up a bit on the color, because
Okay.
when I see, a series of Augochloropsis fulgida in the Midwest, it's almost pick outable by eye. It's so bright, and hence the name. And usually you can separate the two by eye with relatively good confidence. That's in the Midwest. The other thing, the punctures, pits on T1 and T2, and most of the tergites in Metallica are much more close together, much finer, and it creates a more dull appearance relative to the super shininess of Fulgida, which has more scattered punctures and slightly bigger, maybe. That's my take.
It's hard to see with this setup, microscope setup. I'm changing the light values here a little bit, but and very fine detail often disappears because of going over the web. And you'll see in Metallica that a lot of times there's a super fine shagreening, I guess they call it sometimes, but like very fine microscopic lines running across. And you'll see that more in sumptuosa, but almost never in fulgida. And maybe I'll just swap this one out with a fulgida now so we can begin to see the contrast in the two. So I'm bringing in fulgida, and so we can see again, we'll look at the abdomen characters. We'll look for the fimbria and the or the hairs there in the abdomen, and as well as here's a shot of T1. And let me back out here a bit. And you can see sort of again, it's in with a better setup, you can see the brightness of the reflections a bit more. I'm afraid that this is not the optimal setup right now for this. Let me try another specimen here, see if I get a slightly different of fulgida here. Yeah, it's so reflective, but you can see the general aspect, and then I'll pull in the edge of T2 area so we can see that there is a comb, as Zack mentioned, but its hairs are the same width as the hairs on the rest of the segment. So you can see that comb there, but the hair width is the same. And you can also see, this is maybe a better shot in some ways. You can see how clean and clear the surface is with almost no inscribed lines. Very reflective, so that makes it hard to see. And you can see that these bigger pits, there's some micro pits in there too, but these bigger pits are much more scattered on that segment. See if I change the light a little bit there, but just really mirror-like in its surface sculpturing.
Yeah, just to chime in on that, yeah, the sculpturing on T1 and T2 especially is fairly different, with fulgida having, you know, smaller, sparser punctures and shinier. Although I think I would caution that character can be difficult if you don't have specimens in front of you. It can be hard to tell which one you have. If you have both to compare, it's pretty obvious. If you don't, it can be tricky.
I find, in terms of habitats, that fulgida can show up pretty much anywhere, and metallica has a tendency to be more in the dry, sandier, but not complete obligate, like seems like sumptuosa is, end of the spectrum. Do you guys see that in the Midwest too?
You know, Zack and I talked about that the other day, and I think he would say yes, probably. But in Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Arkansas, the two metallica and fulgidas occur together. They're everywhere, all kinds of habitats, with or without sand.
Okay.
But another point to that distributional point is once you get into the Great Plains, fulgida is gone. It's only metallica. So if you're in Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, the only fulgida I have seen are right on the eastern borders of those states. And everything else is metallica.
And I think because of the identification issues, that one needs to be cautious when interpreting whatever the current distribution maps are for this group, particularly because the names have shifted so much.
What's on screen now?
Pardon?
What's on screen now?
This is a second fulgida specimen, so you can see the fact that the fimbria, the comb hair, the hairs are the same as above. T2 is a better place to look, but this particular we saw it on the other one, so I'm not sure we need to spend too much more time there, but the hairs, oops, let me just dial this down. The hairs are more obvious in T2 area. Do you have other characters that you want to talk about here? We should take a look at, I know, the pronodal angle, because we're going to compare that and contrast that with sumptuosa and to some extent anonyma. And so if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to shift to that.
Sounds good.
Okay. So I've spoken with Mike before. When I was starting out, I called a number of metallica specimens sumptuosa. First of all, because sumptuosa is so rare, I just don't see it in the East, that is, or at least in the mid-Atlantic states. In Florida, could be quite a different story. Let me change the angle on this. And because
yeah, it might be better to look at sumptuosa first, because that one, it'll stand out more.
All right, so let me put these back for the moment here and pull out a sumptuosa. So I'm going to pull out a, you want an Eastern or Western sumptuosa?
Shouldn't really matter.
Okay.
I think.
I've got, well, they are all deserving of comparisons and discussions. But first, let me just back this down. So I have a metallica on the right and a sumptuosa on the left. And even though this is not quite in focus or the greatest plane, you can see that sumptuosa is bigger. And that's the general pattern, is that if you have a lot of specimens, you'll see that the sumptuosa specimens are quite a bit bigger. And now we're going to dial in onto the pronodal. There's several other things we'll talk about, but let's dial into the pronodal collar and angle here. And I'm going to work on the light here in a second. So what we're looking at, so the pronotum is basically this horse collar around the head of bees. The scutum, which you're looking at the edge of here, is the big top plate, and there's a ridge across the top that is what people usually call the pronotal collar area. And this section here, which you're just seeing a profile of that sticks out. If we look straight down, like here, you don't see the pronotal collar at all. You're seeing this large wing that has elevated and is thin in sumptuosa. And this is often used in other species too, but this is the thing we want you to take a look at. And we'll try a couple different angles, maybe a couple different specimens to better illuminate that. So if you guys want to speak to that. So there's the angle. So this is quite, for those of you who don't look at it, these kinds of things a lot, this is huge. This is maybe Dianthidium has something bigger, but almost no bee species have something that's projects up that high and above the plane of the scutum. Get another shot there from a different direction. See if that looks, what that looks like.
An important thing to note about that, it's a distinctive right angle, the outline of that projection. That's an important characteristic of Sumptuosa humoralis.
Here, I'm just showing you, this is not a good view of the angle per se, but here's the pronotal collar. So the pronotum is this entire segment here, a lot of which is often hidden by the head. And when dealing with this area, which often has really good characters, a lot of times you have to peek in from the sides and hope that the head of your specimen is one way or the other. This would be what is called the collar area. This is the angle area. There are other names which I can't recall that people tend to use. Let's see if I can shift this again to get you a shot where you can see the angle better.
Yeah, I typically call it the pronotal flange, although the pronotal angle is also something that I've heard. And yeah, it's kind of hard to pick up from here, but it's like a thin carinate wing that kind of comes off. And all Augochloropsis kind of have that to some degree, but in Sumptuosa, it's way more pronounced and has that right angle, as Mike was pointing out.
I'm going to pull another separate specimen here to give us a better shot of that, or at least a different one. These are all incredibly ancient. What am I looking at here? South Dakota, 1924. Thank you, Smithsonian. Looking at head-on view. That's not a great shot of it. Let me try it from, yeah, this is where twirling it around in your fingers has lots of advantages compared to looking at a fixed point microscope on the internet. Yeah, that's another, well, here it is. It's huge. It's just not contrasting very nicely on this microscope.
Yes, and it's a little bit less pronounced in the males, but it's still there and still pretty diagnostic.
And you can see it runs out here and still is elevated and flanged. And if we looked at it from the side, you'd see that, as Zack pointed out, that is super narrow. Let's see if we can.
Yeah, it runs in a line all the way to the pronotal lobe and kind of is on top of that. And once you compare to Augochloropsis metallica, I think it's fairly obvious.
Yeah. And this is why we want museums to stay around, because a lot of times your gold standard after using whatever key you want to use is to go and compare. This is true for any bee specimen. Compare your bee specimen to known specimens, and that's going to give you a better final product, because keys can be tricky because you're just using someone's words, and a lot of times you're using their, a key can be just simply notes to the author's self rather than something that is useful to someone who's never seen these features before. So again, an imperfect view. There's this sharp right angle. It's running off to the side here. But let me swap this out with the metallica I have here and see if we can get a shot of the pronotal collar in some way. It's always a tricky area. Like I'm gonna have to probably dissect specimens for Andrina to show their pronotal collars when we get to that point, because it's so difficult to see into there. So same area. This has, and this is what's tricky from a key. This pronotal collar is quite raised. This flange or this area right here is raised quite a bit compared to most other species, but not to that great extent that you saw with sumptuosa. So that's why I see in a lot of collections sumptuosa specimens that are just these metallica ones over again. So there it is. It's oblique, so it's not at exact right angles, but it's elevated. It's clearly different from a halictus or something. So that's metallica. Let's maybe go back at this point to sumptuosa, and we can look at some of the characters on the abdomen. Does that sound good to you guys? Do you have other things you want me to show on these metallicas? Or fulgida?
I think that's good for now. We can come back to them if needed.
Yeah. All right, so here is, we're back to sumptuosa again. You guys want to talk about what's going on here? This is a Western specimen.
Yes. Yeah, and for me, the kind of the key character for sumptuosa is this really heavily sculptured tessellate abdomen. It's been described as having like a silky appearance. And that's how I think of it in my head. And so this will differentiate from metallica and fulgida because those have sparser punctures and are much more shiny compared to this. And another thing to note for these that also confuses people is that the rim of the first and second tergites also have this hair comb, although it's very frequently worn off in most specimens. So some people see that comb and think it's metallica, but it's not.
What I've seen from these older specimens is that, and we have quite a bit of Eastern material, is that this comb is strongly present in the Western soon-to-be species compared to the Eastern one. Like this comb is sparse to almost absent in a lot of those specimens, and I don't know if that's an absolute, but it does seem to be a pattern. And this is even thicker than metallica.
Yeah, maybe a little thicker, but also shorter. And I would say in the majority of specimens, it's worn off.
Yeah.
That I've seen.
But you can see what they're talking about here with all this surface sculpturing. So there's no mirror-like sections at all. It's all completely inscribed by these microscopic, almost scale-like lines. But you can still see the pitting here too.
Yeah. And the pits are also, smaller and shallower compared to metallica and fulgida.
Yeah.
And once you see an actual specimen, it's very distinctive and much more pronounced if you have one in hand, I think.
Yeah, the problem is that a lot of people don't get to see these, yet it's sort of on the books. But really, I've not seen, first of all, in the East, this species is almost absent. Like I haven't seen a recent specimen from the Mid-Atlantic, for example, at all. All the specimens are these old ones. It's only recently the only recent specimens have come from Florida that I've seen, but they're all this coastal sand dune to really, really deep sand types of situations. What's that look like out west?
Well, the same thing in terms of deep sands along the big rivers like Mississippi and Missouri, but also all the way out into southeastern New Mexico, western Nebraska, where there are the dunes or dune-like deep sands.
Yep.
But it's common. I see specimens frequently. I mean, I have a fair number of specimens, collected in the last few years from all those places. So it's not rare out here. It's characteristic of those sites, actually.
We've done a lot of collecting along the coastal areas up and down the East Coast, and I have not come across one yet.
Wow.
Except again down in Florida. And we have interior dunes. We have the Sandhill complex, which I'm sure there's probably old specimens for, and there's the New Jersey Pine Barrens and similar. So it may be up here. It probably should be on some of these watch lists.
Yeah, I don't have a good. I'm not sure why that would be. I mean, you have other sand obligates that are still there and abundant, right, Sam?
Well, we do, and but it's part of this group Trichusa dorsalis and dianthidiums and other things that haven't been seen for years, and then every once in a while they'll show up. But those have, in addition to being in deep sand areas, they're also only on certain plants. They're specialists. Whereas my assumption is that sumptuosa is not a plant specialist. What do you guys?
Oh yeah, I've got a lot of plant records for the females. A lot of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a generalist. Yeah,
So,
at least in Minnesota, it's very much a deep sand specialist. So there's not a ton of locations where we find them, but when you do find them, they can be quite abundant.
Yeah, we get some. We have a bunch of locations that are deep sand areas, and we'll get certain things like lazy glossum nymphale, and also um, uh, Augochloropsis splendens will be unbelievable numbers, but and then there'll be a handful of Augochloropsis metallica usually, and none of these. So I think this is an Eastern one. This is from, maybe I better swap this out because I don't see where it is from, but let's get something. Here's from Florida, just to contrast the two species, because there's some murky middle areas, like what's going on in the Great Lakes. So you have some insights into that, I think. Guys, what do you see? What do you see in the Great Lakes?
Yeah, sumptuosa is there. The name may end up being different, but it's the same, sand obligate. It's not super abundant, but it's there.
And that's the western.
Yeah,
what's going
the
to
western form.
species?
Yeah, the western form. At least
So
the way we see it.
here's the eastern one, and
Eastern.
Sumptuosa. This
Okay.
is from Florida. And so this, and you can see the heavy sculpturing and things here. And the pits are, I believe you're determining the differences in terms of like morphological would be having to do with pit density, right? On T1?
Right. And Zach can correct me if I'm misspeaking this, but in the eastern form, the pits are overall more separated, and in the western form, overall, they're closer. I mean, that's kind of oversimplifying, but that's pretty much, I think, one of the things.
Yeah,
first
Florida is just a weird place. I think there's more going on than we're aware of, just because we don't have a lot of specimens. But there's probably additional species in Florida that we're not aware of or don't have well resolved.
Yeah, most of the material I have here as a sumptuosa group is from Florida. I believe they have some old New Jersey stuff here.
We have a question in the chat.
Yep.
Is there a particular measurement for deep sand for habitat? Also, are there publications that address floral association and habitats for the green bees?
Well, I'll speak to
I'll
speak to the deep sand thing. Yeah, sands that aren't that may be seasonally wet but are generally dry, except after a rain. So in lots of the Midwest, we have sands right along the rivers, but they flood frequently and they're often wet and disturbed. But in deep sands, the disturbance frequency is infrequent, except by wind, perhaps. And so these are sands that we're talking, God knows how deep they could be. I mean, in some of those Great Lakes dunes, who knows? And in Nebraska, central Nebraska, with all the sand hills. So if they're wet sands that are wet seasonally, or frequently, those tend to be shallower sand. In my way of thinking, shallower sands. I don't know if that's you guys think of it that way or not, but I don't know if
We're
that helps
wondering
you.
if Sleeping Bear dunes are an example.
Oh yeah, Sleeping Bear, Grand Sable Dunes, Superior, and all of central Nebraska, sand hills there, and again in further the Midwest and along big rivers, you have basically old, I just call them old floodplains that no longer, for a variety of reasons, no longer get flooded, maybe because of levees or river management, but have a lot of sand. And this is particularly true of Mississippi. And those also are, even though they're not dunes per se, they're fairly deep sands and dry, and rarely, if ever, flood anymore. Get floodwaters on them. So those would be equivalent to the deep sands of the dunes. And those bees are there. I hope that helps.
Yeah, in terms of floral things, I think, there's revisions of, if you're talking about all green bees, there's revisions for Augochloropsis and the Augochloropsis group. And you'll just see that they're using almost whatever's available. So I think of them as super generalists.
Yeah,
We have one last clarification on the depth, and then I'm going to cut the conversation to email. Depth of 1 to 10 feet, 10 to 20, greater than 20, question mark.
Well, I mean, and it could be 1 to 10. It could be all the way above. Again, I think the important part is that these are sands that don't get, they're well drained. They don't hold water long. So I don't know that the depth thing might be a red herring to some extent. I don't think you need to go around measuring the sands, but all those sands around the Southern Great Lakes, they're very, very low dunes, only maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 feet, but they stay dry most of the year. And I think that's as important as the depth, and maybe more important. And I think any sand that's 10 or 20 or 30 feet deep, that's going to be those are going to be dry sands.
It's probably a nesting thing, but I don't know that of any studies that actually clarify why some of these species actually are only in these deep sand areas. And it's very clear that you have dune species and you have a gradient of got to have a lot of deep sand to, a little sandy soil. Agapostum splendens is like, well, if it's sandy-ish, I'm good. But clay, I'm out, so it's a sand specialist, but it's not got these same limitations that some of these other groups do. And they all seem to have slightly different criteria, but what it is that makes them have to have sand likely has to have something to do with their nesting biology, but it's not clear to me.
All right, let's move on. I'm going to give us a 15-minute warning.
Okay, I'm going to put up I used to have a bunch of anonyma specimens, and then I gave them away to somebody to do something with. And now I am down to one very bedraggled specimen. I'm going to put the specimen in and then bring in a metallica specimen. And recall that metallica was smaller than sumptuosa, and anonyma is another group that if you have a bunch of the specimens, you can often pick them out just by their size, because they are smaller still than the metallica group. So pretend there's an abdomen on there, and you will hopefully believe that that anonymous specimen on the right is smaller than even the usually more common metallica. But down in Florida, with the sampling I've been able to be participating in or do myself, it appears to be more common in a lot of places. So
yeah, I have anonymous specimens from Everglades all the way up into north central Florida, recently collected in the last 10 years. And the color varies from the deep purple to pure green.
Yeah, you can see here, and this is generally true of, however, of specimens in that are on the metallic end of the spectrum will often push towards blue and even purple as you go down the Florida Peninsula or even get close to the coast. So color again becomes difficult to work with, but and I have also seen bright green anonyma ones too.
Yep.
So the key here, the size is a good general character, should add to your plate of weight of evidence, But what you're looking for, if I can get a good shot of this, is an inspection of the metanotum. Oh, well, actually, no, the propodial triangle and the metanotum together. If I can get the hairs sort of out of the way a little bit better, maybe I'll bump this up. So in most of the other species, I think all of them, what you're going to see, and this is disguised a little bit by the hairs, but you can see that this distance is pretty short. This is the dorsal surface, the propodial triangle, however you want to refer to, and this is the metanotum, and back here is the scutellum. A lot of times, this distance, longitudinal distance, is longer than or about equal to the scutellum in other species of Augochloropsis, but in this one, it's short. So this is about the same size or shorter than the metanotum, which is also the, a short segment. Additionally, which I'm not sure I can show in this specimen, there's this weird-ish trough that runs down the center of the specimen that is either not present or only vaguely present in the others. I'm going to try a slightly different angle, see if we can see between some of that hair. Do you guys have anything else you want to say about anonyma?
Yeah, something I've noticed on all the anonyma I've looked at, compared to fulgida or metallica, there's a predominance of dark hairs on T2, T3, and T4 on anonyma, and I have never seen that on fulgida or metallica, even those that are from Florida.
Right.
So,
I think,
so the dark hairs, again, can be worn away, but
yeah.
I see that as being pretty consistent.
And that, I think that is a good character. And sadly, we have no abdomen to look at.
Okay.
You can see, I'm up at highest power. There's scutum, scutellum, metanotum, propodial triangle. You can see hints, let's say, of this central trough right there, and this very short distance in contrast to the others. The smaller size, and I think Mike's probably right. The dark hairs are going to pull that out. And Zack mentioned that there probably is, and we have some evidence for this too, at least one more species of Augochloropsis down there. I want to go back to
yeah, just to chime in, the dark hairs, the combination of the short metanotum and the dark hairs on the abdomen will diagnose this species, and it's only found really in Florida, maybe some surrounding area, but you're not going to find this species in the Midwest.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how far around the coast it goes, on the Gulf Coast. It does, I think, get up into, I'm almost certain, into southern Georgia on the coast. So, Mike, you have this thing that in your key on Augochloropsis sumptuosa in terms of the vertex being
yeah.
So when you say, what do you mean by that? So
when you look at the head in, we'll just say, full facial view, and you look at the area of that head that's above the ocelli,
yep,
it's greater, more pronounced in sumptuosa than in any of the others.
Okay.
And so, it's not, I wouldn't say it's dramatically so, but that's the first thing I look at. I mean, yeah, it just stands out.
And so in other people's sort of parlance to that, you have a longer, a greater distance from the ocelli to the back of the head, which is very sloped. I'm going to show a picture here. Is very sloped in Augochloropsis. In other words, it's not a very sharply defined area. So we'll show here a sumptuosa from somewhere. And so this, Mike, if I get you right, you're talking about like how many ocelli?
Yeah, basically. Okay. Yeah. But it's most obvious in direct facial view.
Yeah.
So I know that's
I just a little nerdy side thing. When you said raised, I'm looking for a hump or something somewhere, but you're really talking about this distance between
Distance.
here
Yeah,
and there. Okay.
yeah.
Right.
Or yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so let me
Just to chime in on that character, it's when you're looking at the face straight on in metallica and metallica fulgida, the ocelli are really at the very top of the head.
Yep.
And then in sumptuosa, the top of the head keeps going past the ocelli.
yeah.
Right. And another way to think of that is the top of the head is more flattened in the others, and in sumptuosa and its allies, it's more, it's not flattened, it's more kind of elevated. And anyway, we covered it. So
you can see what these guys are talking about here. And so here's a metallica specimen, and this distance is quite short in contrast to what you saw in that last one, where there's probably, you could have fit almost 2 ocelli distances. And this varies, this is a pretty much right angles to the plane of the face shot, and that's less than the ocelli distance, but it's harder to measure in contrast to other species where we often use the number of ocelli distances from of this space from the back of the head or the vertex to the ocelli. But you can see what Mike was talking about, which is it's quite a bit shorter, and in all the other species compared to sumptuosa, and that's another good measure, and maybe should be like first on the list, which I think is in your guide when looking for this, because the others are still somewhat comparative, and here you can actually almost measure something. I think we're closing in here on the end of our hour. Do you guys have something else you want to talk about or see or try and get me to look at, or things you want people to do? How you have Mike's key, how recommendations on what you would call these things in collections at this point, and what names you might be applying, or is that too early?
Zach?
Yeah, I guess I can speak a little bit to that. Like, yeah, we are going to be making some substantial changes. But in the meantime, I would say make sure to differentiate between metallica and metallica fulgida. This is a case where, they're treated as subspecies kind of as a historical artifact, and they should actually be separate species. So lumping them together just under metallica is not correct. And if you're in Texas or Florida, you're probably going to encounter undescribed or unknown forms. So be careful.
And that's also true of the Southwest. Southern Arizona, and
So let's say you're in Arizona. Would you just say Augochloropsis species to be safe about names, or can you pull sumptuosa could show up there? Would you be able to pull out the sumptuosa from the others or not? Even that?
I had not seen any sumptuosa from Arizona.
New Mexico.
It may well be there.
Yeah.
But no, the unknown Augochloropsis that I have seen from West Texas into the borders of Mexico and into Arizona would look very much like metallica, very much like that, and that's what most people would call it. But upon close inspection, they're different.
Yeah.
So whether metallica even occurs out there is questionable.
Right. So I'm just looking to give people advice here. Okay, I'm collecting in West Texas. I'm doing a study. I get a bunch of Augochloropsis. Can I do anything more than calling them SPA or not?
You call metallica SL, metallica group. That's informative.
Okay.
To some level.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on what you find, I think. I mean, it is tricky because one of the forms that I'm pretty sure is unknown or undescribed kind of falls in between what metallica and fulgida look like. So it'd be very easy to confuse.
But by all means, please collect them.
Right. It seems to
need
be
more
easy to do.
specimens. Yeah.
And send them to Zach or Mike.
Yeah,
and
along
if
the
you
Gulf,
wanted to,
along the Gulf Coast. I mean, yeah, we really need specimens from there.
Yeah, the Gulf Coast is always an interesting area for lots of species because you have Florida and you have South Texas, and then you have a hiatus where there are more collections going on now than in the past, but defining where the stopping and ending points. And I think we have surprises in that a lot of these species populations that look like they have an hiatus along the coast actually don't. It's just that they haven't been collected enough.
Yep.
I have a couple of things in the chat that I want to, even if I have to stop the recording, that the conversation can continue. There are a couple papers that people have posted to the question, is there any data on why green shiny coloration is evolutionarily beneficial? Do they look different under the UV spectrum? We have some things talking about that they confuse predators, might be UV reflectance to reduce DNA damage, thermal regulation. All of these are great questions. Wondering if you can speak to any of that. And then also somebody wondering if they can send their bees or email you about Western Oklahoma.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely take that.
Okay. Well, we'll chat amongst yourselves about the reason bees are green.
Well, I would say, my impression is that molecularly, it's a pretty relatively easy switch to metallic colors. Do I have that right? Zach, you probably know more about molecular stuff.
I don't know the molecular stuff. I think it's a combination of like warning coloration, but it's also like predator avoidance, and that it can be harder to focus on, especially when they're in flight.
Right, you've drained our information pool.
But there's so many green other insects. I mean, it's not just the bees, obviously. It's green everything. I mean, widespread.
And then you have to ask, well, why do they turn purple and blue down in the deep south? Like, is that an accident or what? Plenty more to do. Next grad student, please. Well, thanks, guys, for showing up and giving us the latest. I think this is really useful because, currently we only have 3 on the books, but now we're seeing that there's a lot more going on, and we can begin to parse these out. We can start sending you guys more specimens from these border zones, and we have some targets for where we might want to do more collecting. So, and then who knows what's going on in Mexico and South America.
Yeah, it's a huge genus that's never been comprehensively looked at. So,
yeah, nice. A lot of work to do.
All right. Well, awesome. We will certainly have you guys back on for other groups. We're, as Claire said, we're going on Christmas break here, or holiday break rather. No Christmas for BP.
Holiday, New Year's break. I'm going to stop the recording, but if anybody hopped on after our little announcements, like Sam said, this is our last class of 2021. We'll come back. I think it is the 5th, whatever the first Wednesday is in January.
Mm-hmm. And these are all recorded and put up for those of you who are new.
Ending the recording now. You all can keep hanging out.
Thank you.